All right, well, Minogiji God, good day, everyone. Good morning. Really happy to be here. Raeanne Madison, Indigenous, Anishinaabe Kwe and Dao, Ajijak and Donem, Pontiac, Michigan, and Dunjabal, Bawading and Dao. And I just shared our traditional greeting to the Anishinaabe people and let you know my name, Raeanne, and where I am coming from in the beautiful sacred town of Sault Ste. Marie, and let you know that I am Crane Clan and that I am from the Anishinaabe peoples. And our talk today is called Sacred Pregnancy and Sacred Support, and it is part one in a five-part series that's going to dive all into supporting Native American families who are at risk for or experiencing substance use disorder, opiate use disorders during the perinatal period, as well as long term recovery from SUD and OUD. And I just put this in here. It is a little bit tongue in cheek, but actually, it was very helpful for me when I was a reconnecting college student a long time ago. I had a mentor at college who is an Anishinaabe like me, who actually sat me down and taught me about how Native people teach and about how Native people learn, and how that can be quite different than the way we're socialized in other types of educational structures and settings. And this all happened because I was feeling a little disoriented and I was having trouble connecting to the way that a certain teacher of mine was teaching us. And I just couldn't really relate to the way that they told like so many stories, and I felt like everything was like really circular, and they didn't just like give me like information like here's the thing and then here's the evidence and then here's the summary, which is what I was really accustomed to in my higher education up until that point. And so I went to my professor and I was like, I have this other Indigenous teacher and I'm just really struggling to understand the way that they teach. And she was like, well, that's, how Native people talk sometimes. And it was really like actually revolutionary for me to understand um, that Native people, when we speak, when we share, when we listen, everything is not always so linear and everything is not always so like start with the empirical data and the empirical evidence and then give you all the list of why this proves or disproves your theory and then summarizing it nice and neatly with a pretty little bow at the end. So I've learned over a long time of working with others, both in learning settings and both as an educator, to integrate more of that traditional method of talking and sharing into my presentation. And so, even though this is a little bit of a joke from Reservation Dogs, if some of you may recognize William Knifeman, who tells Bear, um, it's the Indigenous way of life. Just get out there and that really is where a lot of my learning has come from. Just really sitting with others, observing, and really doing and working with my hands. So, a lot of what I'm going to share is going to come from that perspective. My mentor at that time also shared with me a couple of other key points that when we're learning in these types of spaces, one, the speaker or the teacher, whomever it is that is sharing with, already having come with a great deal of prayer, a great deal of intention. Hopefully, you can see that in the way that I present. Something maybe a little bit different than the last time you learned from me, maybe very similar. She shared that sometimes you have to hear things several times in order to really take them in, and that you will learn something new, even if it's just one thing every single time you learn. So sometimes in other educational settings, we can get a little frustrated, like, oh, we're hearing the birthing story again. Like I've heard this 100 times, but maybe this time you'll hear something a little bit different or you'll have a different clarity on the subject, given that you're also bringing your own renewed experience and expertise to the space. So, just a little bit of an orientation into how I'm going to approach this discussion as well as the whole series for this, and some insight into who I am and my background. Of course, in our communities, our our educators are really tasked with, a high amount of responsibility for trust and transparency, as well as proving of oneself through works of action. And so, I want to be really clear that the perspective I bring is just my perspective. And it's just one, and it's probably pretty valuable, and I hope it's good, but it is just like a piece. And everyone here, we could open it up and spend, more time learning from every person in this circle. All of us have our own expertise. All of us have our own experience that we're bringing into this, our own gifts. Many of us are coming with a certain name or clan that we were born into that's going to facilitate how we move through this work. And so just take it as it is and understand that. It can't be, the most comprehensive thing on the planet. It's just what I have to share, and hope that I can bring some value through what I'm going to share today. And so, my background, really important to share this at the beginning, just for transparency. I am a doula, and I'm an educator, and I'm just a helper. Like, I just help people, and that's what I'm known for in the community. I do a lot of teaching. I work with others to mentor them and teach them how to help families, especially those who are having children, those who are experiencing reproductive experiences across the spectrum. And I've primarily spent my career working with Native American people in the Great Lakes region, and then teaching in Native communities across the US and Canada. That being said, I am not someone who's in recovery from substance use disorder or opiate use disorder. So when I share about this topic, I cannot bring the truth or the spiritual experience of what it means to have gone through that. All that I can share is what I think I'm pretty good at, which is helping others, and what I think I'm pretty experienced at, which is working with a lot of families who have walked that road, with the invitation that everyone here also carries that expertise and that passion and that knowledge. And if there's any corrections that need to be made along the way, or any additions to what I'm sharing, I'm very, very welcoming of that. And contact information is there in case there's any further questions about what we're talking about, or if there's anything you want to connect on afterward. And I know that some of you have probably been in spaces with me before, and a lot of us have shared together in a lot of learning. And what I bring to this space that I've always strived to do is to center or recenter, or perhaps remember um, our ceremonies of life, and to center them alongside the other ceremonies that are being reclaimed and remembered in Anishinaabe territories. And I consider myself to be somebody who has been very privileged to be able to basically grow up in Anishinaabe lands, and eating our traditional foods and observing a natural way of living, having lived in northern Michigan my whole life. And pretty much from the age 19 onward, having been immersed in a life of ceremony. And I don't say that to say, like, oh, I'm so elevated or like knowledgeable compared to other people, but it's really just to be transparent about where I've come from, and acknowledging that a lot of Anishinaabe did not have that privilege. And so I take the responsibility very seriously when I'm in spaces with the task that I've been asked to uplift these stories, that I do so with a lot of permission and a lot of thoughtfulness. And I think that is the work that I've been sent here to do. So that's why I keep doing it. And so I always like to bring up our stories about this ceremony, and to share, from my own experiences, having gone through this as a mother of three, having birthed three children, and as a doula, having worked with many, many people for the past 16 years in their ceremonies of life. And really to uplift birth and postpartum as the very sacred rites of passage that they are. For many, many reasons, our communities have been um, very, uh, how do I want to say this, detached from, or maybe we've just seen such a shift in how our ceremony of life is treated or how it is experienced in a way that we can look into, the fields that we work in and see there's so many health disparities, meaning that Native people are experiencing worse health outcomes than our white counterparts, even within the same geographic locations and even under the same socioeconomic experiences. And a lot of us have been putting our heads together to ask why. And we can really trace these health disparities back to many points in our history where we have been systemically and quite intentionally removed from our natural ways of living and our land based and kinship based practices that were, in fact, very protective of people across the entire lifespan, and especially in those most vulnerable periods of time, such as during birth and in the period of time after birth, and including for our newborn babies as well. So that's really how I try to center everything that I share, which is this ceremony of life. What does it actually mean from a spiritual perspective, from the physiologic and the anatomical perspective? What does it mean for the birth giver? What does it mean for the non-gestational parent, maybe the partner, the father? What does it mean for our whole community to step into service to protect this ceremony? What does it mean to reclaim sacred fire, and what does that have to do with giving birth? What do we know about our newborn protocols and our newborn ceremonies? So that's what this series is hopefully going to bring some light to, as well as opening up the space to sharing from that wisdom that comes from the people that are in this space as well. And so I I just share this because that's the gift that I bring to this space. And that's just, one perspective on how we could address health disparities. But for me, I think it's very effective because there are so many parallel movements happening in our community. We're seeing a lot of language revitalization. We're seeing a lot of, water protector work that's going on. There's a lot of revitalization of other cultural practices, and a lot of people are very eager to reconnect, and especially within younger generations, to remember who they are and to reclaim their culture as Anishinaabe people. And so I'm like, hey, don't forget about birth because it's also really important. And it's really important that we integrate um, thinking about and remembering birth and postpartum and our newborn babies and our new moms in all of the other revitalization work that is really, really awesome to see in our communities. So that is the ceremony of life. And that's why I feel so passionate about revitalizing that and uplifting that in these types of spaces. And I am someone who I do have that little academic mind, even though I consider myself not to be an academic, but I do like to have language and frameworks to think about things. And I like to organize things in my head, and have some language to describe them. And so I'm always asking myself, like, what actually is ceremony? If someone was to come to me and ask me, or, if my my elders were testing me to actually go and put in the work, and from my experiences working with families and also just the real deep, deep spiritual work that I've done as a mom, in birthing three children, this would be my answer. And of course, it isn't, so comprehensive. And the only thing that can be said about ceremony, and definitely, it's just my perspective and just what I have to offer. And if there's anyone here who has anything additionally to say, then please do. And up in the top left there, the corner there is some of my ceremony family. We do ceremony in Flint, Michigan, which is about 3 hours south of where I live, and feel really lucky that my firstborn child, all the way up to the pandemic, has basically been able to be raised in this lodge. And The elders there take really good care of us, but also teach us a lot, but in a really, really gentle way. And so, I was consistently going to ceremony in that lodge several times a year for about 9 years of my life. And so, ceremony can be described, in my opinion or my perspective, just what I'm offering is this in between space. And the reason why we have so many protocols about how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to walk and talk and work in ceremony is because we are essentially in this open space. Sometimes we're literally in this like portal between what we call our world and what we understand as creator's world or the spirit world or the sky world. And so when we're in that space, we want to be really careful and really conscientious. And those teachings are supposed to apply to our daily life as well, in the way that we carry ourselves, in the way that we treat each other, in the way that we show up for ourselves and each other, the way we carry our clan responsibilities. All that is supposed to apply outside of ceremony as well. So we're in this in between space. Some could even describe it as we're in between the like we're in between life and death. That's how serious ceremony is supposed to be treated. And when we're in the ceremony of life, literally the ceremony of birth, we have that birthing person or the life giver, the one who's carrying the pregnancy, who's actually leaving this world to go into that spirit world to get their newborn baby and to travel back with them. And some of you may have been in other spaces where I've shared, the experience of doing this. And it took 3 times. It took me 3 babies to really fully experience and understand extremely clearly what that looked like and what it felt like. But it is literally this out of body thing. You're like going out here, getting your baby. It happens very, very quickly. And then boom, you're back in your body and your baby is born. So we're in this real open space, and that's why we have a lot of safety rules and proper conduct in ceremonial settings. I like to um, notice patterns, and I like to um, create meaning out of what I see that is repeated in the environment around me, and how people act, and how do they help each other, and how do they talk, and how do they behave. And I didn't really know until last year that this is a neurodivergent trait, but it's really come in handy because I have all these ways of describing things that I think are really helpful to myself and hopefully to others too. So I've noticed, how do my elders, how do my sisters, how do my aunties act in these spaces? And what do the men do in ceremony? And what are the roles of everybody? And I have noticed these things. I've noticed that there's this great deal of humility in ceremonial spaces. I've noticed that, our elders are always kind of checking people and correcting them so that we all understand all of us are equal, all of us are important, all of us are valuable. The concept of like egoism doesn't necessarily apply to ceremonial spaces. And if it did, then there's always an elder there who sort of corrects it right away. Because ceremony is about service to the person going through it. And we are all there for the safety and the care and the protection of them, knowing that there's a time for all of us to shine, and all of us bring our gifts, all of us bring our medicine. So we come with that humility, and we learn that through our elders who are constantly, guiding us and giving us that gentle correction that they do. I've noticed a lot of generosity. Anishinaabe people, a lot of Native people are very, very generous. I think this is really one of the gifts that can be observed working with Native people. I find this to be extremely humorous as well. So everything is, very serious and very proper, but there's always that, lightness, that silliness, that teasing that can happen. And everyone's just very giving. When you come into our lodge, there's typically, someone who's cooking all the food. And so that's like a big gift. That was my role for a long time. I had to apprentice in the kitchen before. After many years of apprenticing, I was allowed to have the kitchen to myself and be the one who cooks, for all of the people. That's how we do it at other lodges. Everyone kind of takes turns. It's just different depending on where you go. But there's always this giveaway at the end, and everyone, like through the year, is collecting these things or making them. And then at the end, you're doing your giveaway and you're receiving the gifts. There's just such a spirit of generosity in those spaces. Whether it's, a really elaborate crafting that you've done, or wild rice that you harvested, or syrup that you made, or, just very simple little things that our kids would do. They would do little drawings, and that would be the giveaway that they contributed. And so there's just always a lot of thoughtfulness in how do we take care of each other in these spaces. And especially a lot of generosity to those who are facilitating the ceremony and to those who are going through that, whether that's our fasters or um, certain types of coming of age ceremonies that are happening. There's just so much that's bestowed upon them. It's kind of like um, they're just treated so well and with so much love and with so much respect and thoughtfulness. And I find that that's really a cornerstone of our community that people don't often uplift or recognize. I find that it's very protective in ceremony. All of us are there to ensure that those who are sick can recover, that those who are in grief, can grieve in that safety, that those who are seeking that healing can find that healing without any, intervention from outside people. I just find there's a lot of protection there, and especially those who are sick, and especially our young ones, and especially our elders. I found that pregnant women in our ceremonies too are treated with a great deal of protection because they are in that in between space all the time. And then there's extra protocols for protecting pregnant women in ceremonial spaces. Ceremony is extremely personal. And this is really important to those of us who work with families who have varying types of experiences in their reproductive lives. Because, and this is a lesson I have learned, like I've been hit over the head with so many lessons, and that's why I share them, because I have to learn the hard way by doing the wrong thing so many times that I can now say, okay, ceremony is very, very personal. And people are going through very personal experiences. They're having a ceremony that sometimes the lessons from that in the learning will unfold over a really long period of time. And that could even be a lifetime. So, me as someone who comes in for just a little short period of time to help this person, I couldn't possibly have any knowledge about what they're going through. It's so, so deeply personal. What the Manadu are asking of them, what they've been tasked with, what their purpose is here, what comes with their name that they've been given, or their clan that they were born into, the history, the family stories that come with them. We just can't really know what that looks like for each individual person. And so we have to have the humility to be like, hey, I don't actually know hardly anything about what this person's going through. And so all I can do is bring myself down to a place where I am of service to them and not ascribing any sort of value or meaning to or judgment to their experiences, because I don't know. I don't know what they've been tasked with. I don't know what kind of spiritual work they're being asked to do. And all I can do is just help. All I can just is just be there. And I was like, when I teach other doulas, I call it baby birding. I'm like, all I can do is like this. I can just be, I can just hold the baby bird until the bird is ready to go. And like that is my role. Okay. And this is all I am able to do. So if I have someone who coming to me who is going through really difficult experiences that I don't understand, or I don't agree with, or I don't like, it doesn't matter. All I can do is just be there for them. And that is what keeps me going through work with people that actually is very difficult. And some of you are probably really familiar with the concept of compassion fatigue or secondary trauma, where we're working with families who are facing such difficulties that actually affects us. And the burnout rate in our field is extraordinarily high, and the turnover rate is also very, very high. And so to have longevity in this space, we have to just let go of trying to seek that understanding and just keep coming back to the idea that ceremony is very, very personal. And I don't ever know what is unfolding for somebody from a personal standpoint. And then, of course, it's all very much centered on the prayer. Prayer is everything in our ceremonies. And it could be that, the prayer looks different. Everyone is not traditional. Everyone walks in the lodge that they've chosen. For some people, that's going to be, in a church. For others, going to be in other types of land-based spiritual practices. For some, they're not even connected in that way. So I don't mean to say our traditional Anishinaabe ways are the one and only best way to do things. Certainly, that's not what I mean to say. Just that the inquiry into a higher power is something that, or the acknowledgement of the self and how we fit into the world around us is something that is central to our ceremonies. And we can uplift that value in a lot of different types of settings. And that is one of the roles of the Indigenous doula, is to have that cultural humility to know and to be able to ask and to be able to serve families in a variety of settings with the diversity of beliefs and practices that people bring into their birthing experience. And so I think a lot about the roles and responsibilities and uplifting. All of us have some part to play. And I'm just so interested when I go into spaces to see what role everyone plays and how we all are responsible for the care and safekeeping of people who are going through ceremonial experiences, such as the ceremony of life or the ceremony of birth and postpartum. And of course, the most important thing, or what comes first, maybe, is just that mentorship, teaching, and observation in order to be someone who serves, someone who is tasked with the role of working for others. It comes through consistent mentorship, consistent teaching, the permission to even be doing what we're doing. That's why a lot of us, we work from our tobacco, we work from, our own uh, going to lodge, our own prayer practice, whatever that looks like. And that's why so many of us thrive when we actually work together rather than separately. And that's why, in public health, they've called it the silo. We're all in our little silos. And then in like the past 10 years, someone was like, we shouldn't work in silos anymore and we should all come together. And here's the result of that, people from different walks of life coming together for the same purpose, which is helping others and learning about how we can do that in a really good way. And observation, again, a very traditional way of learning. It doesn't just apply to ceremony, but, we have this Indigenous pedagogy, which is get out there and learn, get out there and observe, because that is one of the ways that we can learn about how to be. And my elder always says this: pray with your hands. And what she means is like, this is a very gentle way of her saying, like, no one should come to ceremony and just be sitting around doing nothing. She says, if you are sitting down, like you can be peeling corn husks. If you're sitting down, like you can go and do the dishes. If you are sitting down, then you have time to sort through the frijoles and pick out this.
Yeah, we'll have premium. Will be just fine.
Oh, okay.
All right.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
So this is her gentle way of correcting us. She says, pray with your hands. She's like, if you have time to sit around, you can pick up a sponge and wash something. Or like there's cedar to be processed, like you can go and do that. There's always wood to be chopped. So she's always telling us, pray with your hands. That means like find something to do. So I always relate this to our work as birth workers because so much of our time is spent in service to families just doing stuff. Like, look around and find a way to be useful, find a way to be helpful, find what needs to be done and step into doing it. And that's, if I could like gift anything to my kids, I would hope that to be it. Like, pick up something and make good of it. So that's one of the most important things that I've learned from my elder, which is to pray with your hands. And so I think about how much work and effort goes on behind the scenes and in the moments of even the most, familiar ceremony. And for this example, I picked the sacred fire. So a lot of you be familiar with sacred fires lit for lots of reasons. In our community, a lot of times it'd be for a lodge or for like a funeral. In some communities, still observe lighting of that sacred fire for the birthing ceremony and reclaiming the sacred fire in that space. And so a lot of you may be familiar with that. Typically, it's going to be it's going to be um, tended to for the duration of the ceremony, which sometimes can be up to 4 days, sometimes even longer, or sometimes just a day. It just really depends on what that ceremony is. And so, if we think about what it takes to put together the most familiar ceremony to a lot of us, and how much work and effort it takes to maintain a sacred fire, not only do you have to come having had the teachings and the mentorship and the permission to do that, there's somebody who has to cut and haul and stack the wood. And we have to know the right kinds of wood that are used. We have to have the ecological responsibility to know that we're not bringing in pests from another region. We have to know what are the protocols when we go out and process wood that's standing versus fallen. What times a year do we take that harvest? How much do we need to sustain a sacred fire for 4 days and 4 nights? What if it's pouring down rain and we have torrential winds happening, which happen often here in Sault Ste. Marie? What if it starts snowing? What if it's 90 degrees and our firekeepers are out there in the heat and there's the fire that they now have to take care of? How does that affect the wood? Right? So something just as simple or seemingly as simple as bringing the wood in for that, um, something we have to think about, because my lodge is downstate and I'm up here, like wood crossing the bridge and um, ensuring that I'm not contaminating the environment with things that I'm bringing from a different environment. Um, Keeping the ash for cooking. We have protocols about that. We have a lot of people who are revitalizing food culture in this space. And so, do you know what kind of wood is used to process corn? And is that something we should be thinking about so that we're not wasting the opportunity to have something that we can actually cook with when we're done? And what are the protocols about that? So, even just the simple thing of like cutting wood and stacking it up so that our firekeepers can have it is something that actually takes a lot of mentorship and a lot of observation. Same with our tobacco. So, in some of our sacred fires, there'll be a point in time where everyone can come up, offer a prayer, offer a request, or just give thanks and gratitude into the fire. And that alone is something that, when our kids are very little, that's one of the first things they get to learn how to do. And there's so many protocols just in that simple act of walking up to the fire and giving an offering. Typically in Anishinaabe country, it's probably done differently in lots of spaces. So I don't mean to say this is the one and only way to do it, but typically in Anishinaabe country, there's, you know, teachings about how to walk around the fire. In some of our ceremonies, we are not to be loud around the fire. We don't, there's certain times where we're quiet. There's certain ways that we approach the sacred fire. We teach our kids not to walk up, on their phones or with their iPads. Electronics are not allowed. They're supposed to be very respectful. A lot of Anishinaabe will hold tobacco in their left hand. And I was also taught that, you, a couple different people and actually in a few different lodges, you don't just go up to the fire and like toss food in or toss in your tobacco, because that's like if you were throwing food at your grandma or you were like throwing food at a baby. Like you treat that with such care and respect that you're supposed to offer it in very gently and get as close as you can, even if you're feeling that heat. um and we even have some ceremonies where you're retrieving things out of it and it's hot as heck, but you have to do it very respectfully. Otherwise it'd be considered like snatching it away from somebody really important. Just the knowledge of what is tobacco. I mean, we could share, for days about how we go out, what kind of plants we're looking for. Are we talking about like actual grown and harvested tobacco, which I love and I love to work with. And it's a challenge for me to grow my own. But I also like to process red willow tobacco. So, like, we have to know when we can do that and what tree we're getting and is it the right one and how to harvest it and how to store it so that it doesn't get mildew. How do we dry it out? And then, how to cut it and how long do we keep that for? How much do we need to use? I hear different teachings about that all the time. I think there was recently some teachings that had happened through the ITC on that topic. So just the simple act of putting your tobacco in the fire, there's so much learning that had to go into that, and so many hands that went into that, right? And so many people that held onto that knowledge, that prayed for that, and gave those permissions for us to be able to do that. And then to even be like a firekeeper, that alone is a whole like master's degree worth of knowledge to know what are those pieces of the bundle that you have to do that. How do you actually maintain it? What are the teachings and responsibility that come along with that? And what kind of supplies do you need to actually be successful in that role? You don't just show up. You have to have a structure. You have to have chairs to sit in. The firekeepers have to be fed. There has to be drinkable water. We might be in a space where there's not running water. I work with tons of tribal communities all across the country, and you may be surprised because here in Michigan, water is pretty accessible to us. It is under threat due to environmental racism, but for now, we have free and accessible water, most of us. We might not think about the fact that in other tribal communities, they don't have running water. They literally have to bus water into their communities, and some of the roles, um, I have an elder in my lodge who comes to Michigan and he spends half his year in the Southwest. In the Southwest, one of his roles is he brings the water to all these people. Um, so water protecting for him looks very different when he's working with people that that you can't just go to the sink and turn water on, right? Or you're in a ceremony and you have to bring the water in. So even just a simple task of like having water to drink, it's something that we take for granted that we might not think about a lot, or some of you probably do. I definitely don't mean to diminish the fact that a lot of people here probably do think about the water a lot in our roles and responsibilities there. But just thinking about like the role in birth. Um, we can't take it for granted that we can go to the sinks and turn the water on. Somebody has to be responsible for that. Someone's hands have to make sure that the people in ceremony have the water that they need. Let alone what if there was an emergency and we had to put the fire out or something like that? Where's that water going to come from? And then we have the travel to and from each location. And then we have perhaps the most important piece of this. I keep saying that it's all important, which is the holding space for prayer. And this is one of the roles that, can be a skill that a lot of us have to learn or have to like polish over time, which is the ability to be there and be present for someone who may be going through the most difficult time in their life. And when we work with families in the newborn period, or we work with families who are going through pregnancy or someone who's going through birth, that could be a really difficult experience. And even if it was really blissful and really, free of all of those barriers that so many of our families face, it's still really intense. And it is a skill and a gift, something that we can all learn and hone in on, which is that baby birding, that holding of the space for somebody who's going through something really difficult. And then when we start to layer in all these extra difficulties that Native families can face, especially those who are in recovery or those who have SED and OUD, then we're like layering in the intensity of that experience. And it is even more important that we hone that skill of being able to just be there and be present for them and do it in a way that makes them feel like they're heard and valued, and not being judged or scrutinized, which is something that our families can definitely face and experience. So all that being said, if there's additional insights or wisdoms that you want to contribute, please do feel free to do so. It's just very much, flow of thoughts from what I've learned and the way that I sort of organize and categorize things. But again, that's just Raeanne speaking. And so anyone here is welcome to share if there's anything different or anything that you would like to share in terms of what do you think about when you think about ceremony. And when I do doula trainings, we really dive into each of those roles and we actually identify like where do we fit into those and how do we apply those kinship roles and responsibilities to the ceremony of birth. And that is the training. And you learn how to do that. It's all very hands-on as well. But we're talking about families who experience, or Connie says this. I like the way she said that, so I stole it for this. She says families at risk for and or experiencing SED and OUD, because really all of us are at risk for. There's so many factors that impact someone's genetic predisposition to substance use disorders, as well as the circumstances leading up to substance use disorder, opiate use disorder. But if you remember, if we can like go back, to our ongoing historical trauma, 100% of Native people are coming in to our care with historical trauma. And that means trauma informed care should really be the gold standard for all families, and especially for those who are at risk for or experiencing SUD and OUD. And we have to have that compassion to just, and that humility. I think is James Vikulich who describes it in the language. He said it's like the lowering of oneself. So we have to have that skill, the lowering of oneself, and the memory that 100% of Native American people are born into and born with historical trauma. And all of us live in a colonized space. All of us still can like look out and see that our land and waters are under threat from environmental racism, from economic and social and cultural injustices. And all of us are still facing the weight of the damage of boarding schools and MMIW. Yesterday was, Red Dress Day and all the discussion that are happening around the continued gendered violence in our communities. There's just so much that we bring into our experiences. And so we don't have to go digging into why a family gets wrapped up into SED or OUD. We just have to like accept it and bring in the tools and supports to help them and to hold that space for them as they go through that journey. Because again, we don't know why they were tasked with that journey. We don't know what kind of personal ceremony the Manadu have asked them to go through. But we do know that 100% of our Native American clients are coming in with that historical trauma and with that ongoing threat to our ways of life due to the world that we are born into. And in the perinatal period, what I've noticed about working with a lot of families who are in recovery or who are, experiencing ongoing SED and OUD, who are trying to connect to resources to heal and be supported through that journey, I've noticed a few things. and a few things that I could actually consider to be inequities that our families face, in addition to just what we know about the maternal and infant health crisis in this country. If we were to like dial it down to what Anishinaabe families who have SED and OUD are experiencing, we can see there's a lot of health disparities that can appear. One is just the increased scrutiny of the choices and circumstances that families are facing. And indeed choose, because people make choices too, right? And we just have to be like unconditionally accepting that it just is what it is, right? And so when families are engaging with systems that are already very much based in you should do the right thing so you have the best outcome, or you could literally be arrested and have your child taken from you. When you layer in a drug addiction or a recovery experience, meaning a history of substance use, then automatically you're coming in with like a target on your back. And this is something our families are very hesitant about in some settings, and in fact may have um, some, what do you call it when you're like opposed to doing it? Like you don't want to seek care if you know that you're going to get a big thing in your note, and you're going to be then judged and highly scrutinized throughout your entire journey. They're going to have more of a medicalized pregnancy and birth if there's a history of SCD and OUD, because of the additional risk factors to the pregnancy, to the birthing experience, and then to the newborn baby. There's just going to be a lot more looking out for them. And so that's just something to take note of. Most people who have SCD and OUD and who are in recovery, they're not going to be eligible for home birth. They may have more of, going in right away. There may be more testing and monitoring of that experience. And so, as doulas, as helpers, we have to be prepared to support them through that, and maybe even to deal with some of the disappointments of what their expectations are. Our people are already chronically targeted for urine drug testing, and they say it's 100% of people, but those of us who actually work in the field know that's not true at all. And if you have SCD, OUD, it's quite possible that there's going to be additional urine drug testing that's done in your pregnancy, and then certainly when you come to the hospital for delivery, and then afterwards as well. And that newborn baby is going to be tested too. So just something to be aware of. Our families are also facing a lot of non-consensual engagement with CPS and social services. And what I mean by this is not someone who chooses to enroll in programs or who asks for help, but rather that some authority outside of them who sees themselves like a purveyor of justice to the family enacts that upon them without their consent. And this looks like, in my world, a family who gets CPS called on them, even though they're in a long-term MAT program, and CPS knocks on their door at 2 a.m. when they just had a baby at 8, and not knowing that CPS has been calling on them. Now you're interrupting the bonding time and the recovery time for my client. And now they're traumatized because some authority came knocking on the door and they didn't know it was going to happen. And they don't tell you who it is. And so you don't know what nurse made the call, and you don't know if they're going to be the one that comes in to check your blood pressure. So it can actually be very traumatizing for families when they're having to engage with these systems of care that actually are harmful to them for lots of reasons. Now, you may be thinking, well, CPS, has all these things that they offer, and families can really get linked to critical social services. It's just that the way it is done to our people, in the way that it's done in such a vulnerable time for them, is something that isn't really appropriate in a lot of settings. And there's a very severe lack of support for breastfeeding and human milk expression for families, especially for birthing people who have a history of SCD and OUD, or for people in long-term recovery who are on medication treatment plan, because there's there shouldn't be because the evidence is there and the practices and protocols are like written in ink about breastfeeding and milk expression. And for the vast majority of people, it is something that they could choose to do and should be supported to do so. There's just a lot of misinformation, and there can be um, like an imbalance in what they want to do and what they're hearing from their care team. And as we know, those shifts change, every 12 hours, and you could have a care team who comes in and says something very different than what you heard the day before. So there's just a big lack of support on the provider side, and it creates a lot of confusion and disappointment for families. And I see a lot of lack of support for NAS newborn parenting skills. Newborn parenting skills are just tricky in general because we're trying to teach people how to be in like a 12 or 24-hour time period after a baby is born. And there's just so much that's going on physiologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And it isn't really the best time for people to take in knowledge and to really like inherit it into their memory. Um, and so hopefully in two presentations from now, we're going to dive into more of the NAS and the NOWs and talk about what are some of those signs and symptoms and what are some of the skills that we can really support families to do. Because we don't want to just toss parents in and be like, here you go, here you go. And then we'll call CPS if we don't think you're doing it right. And then the need for NICU support. So this is something that families could potentially need. Now, a lot of you are very aware of the strides that have been made to stop the compulsory separation of families from their newborn babies who have drug exposure or any kind of substance exposure. It used to be that like 100% of them would be shipped off to the NICU. Now, for us in the UP, like the vast majority of people do not have a NICU in their birthing facility and be sent either 3 hours away in one direction or 5 hours away or 6 hours away, or for some of our families on the other end of the UP, like even into another state, Wisconsin or Minnesota. And so that is not supposed to be the standard of care. Now we have a lot of advocacy and a lot of education, a lot of programming that is ensured rooming in for eligible families that they can keep their children with them, and that we have more ability to monitor those babies and we can actually keep mothers and babies together. It's a big barrier if a child does have to be still sent to the NICU because it necessitates them being sent to the NICU. And then as a doula, I have to be thinking, okay, how am I going to ensure the recovery of my client? What are we going to do about milk expression, milk handling, milk storage? How am I going to support my client, who's still bleeding, and what is that going to look like? How are they going to drive to Grand Rapids or to Ann Arbor or to um, Green Bay? Like, these are just things that material wise, we have to think about that support. So some families, they are going to be at a higher risk of needing to utilize NICU care. And thank goodness we have that available, but it just creates this extra layer of thoughtfulness as to how we can serve that family and what they're going to need specifically. And I thought it was important to share this because this is something that I see a lot in the communities that I work in, that I've been privileged to be able to work in, which is that substance use affects non-gestational partners, and that has a big impact on the family's health and well-being. It isn't always that a pregnant person has SED or OUD, but it could be that the non-gestational partner has SED or OUD or is in recovery. And that can absolutely create barriers and opportunities for that family. I find that it's actually very common, and it can be something that's very challenging and very difficult for a pregnant person or someone with a newborn baby to have a partner who's going through that. And it can create some additional needs for support for me as someone who's helping the family and just different connections that they may need to be able to access. And There's just the reality of what it means to be in recovery or what it means to have a history of SCD and OUD. When you have a young family who really wants to thrive and wants to take care of their child, the reality is just that having a record can really negatively impact your life in a way that can create so many barriers to success in early parenting, because it can negatively affect your housing and what kind of housing support you have access to. It could affect your employment, and it can affect your ability to be a licensed driver. And I see this a lot where families like really want to do right, but it is that record that just keeps throwing so many barriers in their way, because there's daily difficulties that are faced when you're in that recovery period, and if you have a history of engaging with the carceral justice system, meaning that if you're on a tether, you're paying for that every single day. You have to check in every single day, and you have to be drug tested sometimes every single day. Somehow, without a car because you lost your license, you have to find your way there and make all those appointments. And if you miss so many in a row, you will be arrested and put in jail again. So it just turns out to be really difficult. And for the poorest among us, that is the barrier that will prevent them from thriving. Because those who can afford it will just pay everything off and it's fine. Those who can't afford it, engaging with that system is extremely expensive. And for those who are already facing multiple intersections of oppression in our society, that's going to equal to more stress and more barriers for them to succeed, even when they really want to and they're very motivated to, because it's really expensive. You have families who are choosing jail time because it's actually cheaper than being on a tether, or that once they are out, there's no way for them to drive to work. And now we might be thinking, well, yeah, if you were arrested for like driving under the influence, then you probably shouldn't be driving around. But what's a young family supposed to do in order to get their groceries and the things that they need for their baby? How are you going to make your appointments? Right? And we have a lack of transportation in the city that we live in. And it also costs money every time you got to call a taxi to your house. And we have limited, availability of the transportation that's done through the tribe, who is and isn't eligible for that, and what kinds of, things they can transport to you, just becomes very complicated. What are you going to do about car seats too? You have people that are very, in recovery from cesarean, clipping car seats in and out of the transporter's car. So it's like you can't just live and you can't just be in recovery and seek the healing. You got to also engage with these systems. And it can be something that creates a lot of difficulty. And I see this a lot with the families that I work with. Daily life is just so difficult for them. And there's just so many barriers to them, and daily difficulties. And not to mention, for somebody who is incarcerated, it then is like this whole other trauma for a family, because that person might have been the provider financially. They may have been the driver of the family. We have a lot of people around here who do not have a license or do not have transportation of their own. um, that person could have been the mother. And now we have to think about, can we even get milk from her? Who's going to take care of the baby? What's the impact of that going to be? So, just so many barriers that families can face when they're engaging in these systems, that aren't, designed for the healing. They're like designed for the punishment. And I think a lot of you probably saw this quote like circulating the internet recently. I thought it was really powerful and kind of just reminded me to stop and remember those cultural humility practices, which is, don't forget the homeless and the addicted are knowledge keepers too, and their knowledge was the harshest to acquire. And I saw a lot of really good discussion, especially from people who are in recovery and from people who have faced SCD and OUD, that we don't know what the Mountaduke have asked of any one person. And we don't know if someone who is, from our outside perspective, doing things that we think are wrong or doing things that we think are harmful or foolish, we don't know what that outcome is going to be for them. We don't know what kind of spiritual work that person's been asked to do. And so I try, and it is a constant inquiry and a constant practice. Um, I try so hard not to give up on families, even when I see that they're really struggling, because I just don't know. And I have prayed. I always pray about my clients, and I've had families that were so frustrating to work for, quite frankly. And I think everyone here is probably too, where you're just like, this is like, I don't know what else I can do for this family. And I literally prayed with my tobacco, like, what should I do? And I've heard like the Manaduke say, don't you dare give up on them. Don't you fucking dare give up on them. My Manaduke are very sassy with me, and it's okay. I accept that. And I'm like, I can't give up on this family. Like, even though the barriers to them, the hits just keep coming, and it feels like progress is never made, or they keep getting set back for so many reasons, I just keep showing up regardless. And I just really try to do that even when it gets really difficult, and take breaks when I need to, because that spiritual knowledge and that spiritual value is there for every single human. So our roles as Indigenous doulas in this space is, I've already alluded to a lot of it, a lot of what we do, or what we strive to do. Of course, everyone's a little bit different in how they show up for families. There's no one authority in what doulas do and how they should do it. There's lots and lots of approaches. But one is we provide prenatal education. The earlier that we can get with someone and work with a family, the better, because we have more time to connect them to the resources that they need, and answering their questions and just being there for them when they need it, and especially our families who are at risk for experiencing SED and OUD, because they just have more fears or more concerns, or more hesitation about engaging with medical systems, especially, like I said, if they have a history of having been arrested. Advocacy at medical appointments. This is something to be very powerful for families who are in recovery or families who have ongoing STD and OUD, because they have that target on their back. They be very highly scrutinized. Sometimes just the act of being there in the room with them and just like, not being sassy or anything like that, but I will often just sit there like this and okay, I'm taking a record of the appointment so I can write down the questions. But it really is like accountability for the provider. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is. It should be that clients have their own authority and their own power, and that they're treated as equals in that space. But the fact is just they're not. And so when I'm in there and I'm like this, like they kind of straighten up a little bit. And I can kind of facilitate, with my skills and understanding of being in that setting, if my client has particular questions or need to debrief afterwards. So that's a skill we're going to dive into in our very last session here. So I'm really excited to bring some of that to you and learn from you all as well in our communication and advocacy masterclass. We do provide that hands-on and spiritual and cultural support for labor, birth, and postpartum, newborn parenting skills. And what's really unique about Indigenous doulas, and why I love working with Indigenous doulas, is that we provide this sense of cultural care and cultural support, regardless of if somebody is very traditional and goes to lodge and eats traditional foods and grew up in the culture and speaks the language. Not everyone does that, and not everyone wants to, but a lot of Native people want to have some sort of aspect of cultural care integrated into their experiences, and they don't even know where to start. And so I love that Indigenous doulas can be that gateway. I have a colleague, Hallie, who says this. A lot of you probably know her and have learned from her too. She says, like, you could be the person that hands that to them, and that could be a gateway to healing for them that sticks with them for their lifetime. And so I like that, we could introduce those cultural pieces to them, regardless of the setting and regardless of where they are in their traditional journey or how much of that they want. A lot of our families really want to reconnect to that. And if we don't know, then often Indigenous doulas can be the one to say, actually, I know who does have that knowledge and I can take you there, or I can, show you where to go to make your appointment so you can go and ask the appropriate person for that cultural care. And then, just globally, like within our community, we do have this responsibility, all of us, to reduce the harm and the stigmas that our families face, and just to continue to be a voice, to advocate, as well as to use our power, privilege, and positionality to uplift the most marginalized among us, to ensure that all the programs and services we are offering and the care that is provided really is culturally rooted and culturally appropriate, and that people in recovery and those who are experiencing SUD and OUD are still treated as very sacred and valuable in these experiences. And so I always just say, like, Indigenous doulas, we are aunties, we're relatives, we're helpers, we're advocates, we're educators, and we're creative. And all of us have, skills in one of these areas, and we just thrive um, in the diversity of this role and what it is that we get to do for families. We protect the birthing lodge and we care for the family. And straight up, that's like the most simple thing to do. But if we go back to the whole discussion that we had about what actually is ceremony, then um, we see that it really isn't just so simple. There's a lot of things to be done, and there are a lot of ways that families need our support. And one doula can't do it all. One doula certainly cannot do it all. It's the entire care team, and really, it should be the family and the community that steps into that place of service for a family who's going through birth and postpartum. And then we intentionally center the care and safekeeping of families across a spectrum of need, meaning we're constantly thinking about who isn't able to access our services and why. What are the barriers for families, and how can we put our minds together and our resources to improve access to care for families facing a diversity of needs, and who isn't in the room that should be in the room, whose voice aren't we hearing that we should be hearing. And so with that, I just want to offer first my gratitude, for sitting through the teaching today and just for being present. I felt really comfortable and safe in the space to share what I shared, and have seen a lot of things popping up. I haven't got to go and look at them. But I'm going to offer that anyone who's listening in the recording to go ahead and take some time to do the reflection on your own or to do it within your team. And I'm going to stop the recording here so that those of us that are in the live session can come out and do just a quick little reflection for the next 15 minutes. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.